Hello everyone, the Wandering Green Man again with a new Let's Talk About. To be honest, I've kept this on a distance for a long time because it's really a broad subject. But it's a request after all, so I'll get to it. But because the way I want to talk about it isn't just many different kinds of information that people don't get, because that would be too conjunct. There would be no red line in them, no big connections between them. So I would rather be talking about why it's information that no one gets. So that seems a little bit more logical and a little bit more this can be and this can be why. A little bit easier to talk about. One of the reasons why information can get to people that no one or why information don't get to someone is it can perhaps be stereotypes. And when I say stereotypes, it's not necessarily the bad stuff, because in psychology, stereotypes can also be used as a first imaging about when you see a person. But it's just the difference between if you judge poorly on stereotype or if you actually get to know the person. That's where the difference is. Don't judge solely by the stereotype, but it's no matter what, you're still doing a stereotype. If you see someone with baggy pants, a hoodie, and really walking and listening to hip hop, you might think him as a gangster. But if you see someone in a black suit with a suitcase, you might think him more as a kind of lawyer, perhaps, when it might not be the case. You're still making the mental imaging of how the person actually is based on how they look. And not just how they look, but also your own interpretation of what it is. A couple of examples of this is, let's start out with maybe a little bit controversial one. The Russians during the ending of the Cold War. Because a lot of people know this from the viewpoint of the West, actually. Because we were in a Cold War against the Russian, and it was a war that could happen at any moment but didn't happen. So it was kind of we hold a gun point at the other's head. And we in the West always thought that the Russians want to attack at any moment. But later on, after the Cold War, actually kind of recent material actually talk more about that the Russians were in the same kind of situation as we were, where they didn't want to attack, but they were still holding up a gun in defense. So not only were they just trying to prevent a war like we were, but they were just afraid of an attack from our front as they were. They didn't want to attack in the first place. And yes, I know there's a difference to now, especially with the Crimea, especially with Ukraine and what happened at the Crimea Islands. So again, controversial one. Another one is when I say something like the deoxytoxin, that's usually a poison, to be honest. It's actually also used as heart medicine to get the heart to pump faster. It can be useful to a lot of people, actually. But since it is called a toxin, you automatically assume that it's a bad thing, something that's gonna hurt you. But it can still be used as something helpful. So that's another thing of it. And when we have talked about stereotypes, we can also talk a little bit about a rather funny fact. There can also be problems when interpreting sources, when other people from other cultures interpret something from your own. Because if the person don't have a real understanding of it, of the source material, it can end up bad. And this one actually has a little bit of a funny history to it, because when I was in high school and I had about the Viking eras, it's a common in Danish schools, so don't question it. We saw a bit of a American documentary. I don't know how you pronounce it actually, but documentary about the Vikings, and it was bad. First off, they said that every Viking came from Norway and sailed directly to the United States. Second of all, they just throw Danish king after Danish king after Danish king as though that, for one, they were all in Norway, and for the second, they all sailed to America. Where that's far from the truth. So I don't know what went wrong with that, but just an outside source interpreting, if you don't know exactly to the point of commas and dots what the history is and what is the background for it all, it's gonna end up bad. There can also be different meaning to words depending on which social platform you are on. If you are a worker, it could be one thing. If you are an academic, it could be another thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's an intelligence gap between these two, but there's just I'm just gonna say it flat out. Academics have a tendency to make really, really big and fancy words about something that's way too simple. And don't get me wrong, this is nothing against academics. In fact, if it was, I would be targeting myself. But it can still happen. I have actually two comparisons in this regard. The first one is actually one again that I had from school. This was a letter from a plumber to a group that specialized in helping people. He wanted to use, I think it was sulfuric acid to clean out pipes, and he found it to be especially effective. And even though this group said that we applaud the idea, but the capacity of the acid isn't compatible with the pipes, meaning that they couldn't take it, the plumber wouldn't actually understand it because of the overly fancy words. So in the end, they actually used a fellow plumber to write back and saying, "Don't use sulfuric acid, it will eat away the pipes." And again, it's just, you can say something if you don't know how to tell something easily to people, it can end up badly. So, but the other example I was talking about is actually kind of recent. I think it was at the beginning of this month, at the beginning of August, that one of my friends, Kaisko, actually made a video, Let's Rant, about oversensitive social justice. And to be quite honest, I agree with him. A lot of the points in that video made perfect sense, because social justice has been, I don't even know if I can call it justice anymore, at least on the internet. But that's not the case. The whole point that started that rant was actually that he read that, who was it? I think it was JonTron who called the game retarded, and that the internet then interpreted as being that he has something against disabled people. People that's crippled, people with Down syndrome, ADHD, I think stuff like that. Where in fact it doesn't. And in that video, Kaisko actually mentioned that retarded isn't compatible, it doesn't mean something that's crippled or has Down syndrome or anything like that. It means actually stupid. That's where I want to actually make a point, because if I look up in a medical book, the word retarded is actually compatible with something that someone that's disabled, someone that's crippled, someone with Down syndrome, someone with ADHD, someone with Asperger's syndrome or autism. In that regard, don't blame on me. I'm an Asperger myself, so I'm just saying what I have researched for. But the challenge in this to get as much information as possible is mainly ask, mainly seek, mainly do something about it. And that's another thing that's a problem in our society. At least when we talk about the common people. And again, I'm not against the common people at all. I know that I'm an academic myself, so this can be quite a problem, but I have nothing against the common people. But there is a problem with attention. And by that, it can pretty much end up with seeing the first piece of information that we actually see and claiming that's true. It's not necessarily true. It's just the first information about the fact that we got. So, yeah, that's at least a couple of different reasons why information can get hard to get. There's stereotypes, there's outside sources, interpretations, meaning of different words, and the lack of attention. But the real challenge of this at all is just we need to see something not just as black and white, because there's many different shades of gray. And no, I'm not referring to the book, please. So I know this is kind of a short one, but the sources and the interpretations and all, it wasn't exactly easy to get. So see you next time.